both part of the music and also saying it is time to start. It's good when music can do both. So, my name is Neil Bedell, and I am your kind of facilitator, moderator extraordinaire for the time today. I am from Toronto, Canada. I work as the Vice President, Student Experience and Success at Centennial College, and I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto in Toronto, Ontario. And that's just me, but there are some fab, amazing folks here in this session as well. We have Glorife, who is right here presenting from the Philippines. So you will see Glorife up next. We also have Stephanie from Korea presenting up third. And we have Marife over here from the Philippines presenting as well. There are two other presenters. The Shea, if you are here, we haven't met yet, but we will work to have you as part of this as well. And unfortunately, Lizette is not able to be here due to a family emergency. But as with anything, we roll, right? So we will go through and you will love everything that folks have to say. So this is a session on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I'm imagining what brings folks in today is a desire for a better world, right? And how we might do that together. And I also understand that there might be some student observers in the room. Are there any student observers in the room today? No. I was just going to invite the student observers who are named as observers to feel free to not just observe and also ask questions if that was comfortable for them. Lastly, there will also be a kind of like awardsy kind of thing at the end. So a QR code will be displayed at the end for you to provide feedback on the presenters. Folks want to kind of get into this neoliberal rating thing around awards and recognition as well, and we can play that game because there's a lot of amazing speakers. So I'll post that QR code at the end so you can have your phones and or computers ready to provide that feedback. And yes, I am also your moderator and also a presenter, but this will not be something like the US elections and presidential rigging. So I will not have any say in however you might want to evaluate us and me. But this will not be something like the US elections and presidential. And we have an echo for our folks joining virtually. And sometimes you just take these signs from the universe for what you need to do. And it's a reminder to say hi to the folks who are engaging virtually. And so glad that you are here today. And the energy of the world told me that I was forgetting something. The other piece, in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's always a fun terrain. It's an important terrain, and it can sometimes be a little bit of a contentious terrain as well, right? Because we all come from different cultures, from different nationalities, and we hold different identities. And so the ask, and I'm sure everyone's going to agree with this because it's a preaching to the choir kind of moment, but in terms of a safe space, hoping that we can all agree that this is a welcoming environment for everyone of various identities, and folks are safe to share in a respectful and inclusive way their thoughts, their questions, and their comments. Folks, we can agree to that, right? Cool. The other thing is sometimes in this, in the learning, especially as more marginalized identities are given voice, there's a newness, and sometimes this newness can be disruptive, sometimes it can be uncomfortable. And so the other ask is that we also hold a brave space in that we're open to things that might be a little heavier, might cause a little discomfort, might be a little bit challenging for us. And we take that and sit with that as an opportunity for deeper transformative learning through deeper dialogue within the construct of a safe space and or after with the presenters. Does that sound like something that's good for folks as well? Cool. Are there any other needs before we have our journey through session 1? Any other journey for folks in terms of participation or needs? Is this okay? Okay. So then in terms of format, what you're going to experience is the presenters going for 15 minutes. I will, because I'm such a bad timekeeper, my my iPhone will be here. I'll be giving folks 3 minutes warnings, including myself, and 1 minute warnings, and then the Emmy Award kind of noise, which won't be glorious music, it'll be some kind of iPhone chime, will go off at the 15-minute mark, and we all know that that's the wrap-up time. Cool? And then after that 15 minutes, we'll go into 5 minutes of Q&A, just so that while things are fresh, instead of waiting for the end, you're able to engage with the presenter like that. Sound okay? Okay, so that'll be the format for our time today as we go into our first presentation, which is me. And somehow, I think the beauty of everything that I don't know how to control electronically will happen. I think. Oh, there we go. Everything is just working in our favor today. So, seasons of love. Part of you may be wondering what this means. How many folks, other than Will, recognize seasons of love? Which I can attribute in certain ways, because sometimes, ways of knowing, just give it away. But Seasons of Love is a song from the musical Rent! Yes. It's a song from the musical Rent. And I was in the musical Rent about 2 years ago in a community theater production, and it was so fantastic. And I want to share some stories of that, and stories generally, as I concurrently put my timer on, because we all want equal sharing and abilities. And if anyone happens to also put their timer on, that's welcome also. So, let's talk about stories. We all have experiences with companies, right? Like we're largely operating in a capitalist society. We have companies, we have telecom companies, we have airline companies, we have companies, etc. I had this experience with a telecom company in Canada recently, Bell Canada. And it was because my parents were getting charged $300 a month for phone, internet, and cable. And $300 a month Canadian is a lot of money for 80-year-olds to be paying for telecom services. Like, it's not like they're creating some kind of web influencer content, right? Like they're just watching a little bit of Netflix and stuff like that. And so I called Bell and I'm like, hey, my 82-year-old parents are paying $300 a month. This seems a little, much and unfair. Like, what can you do? And they're like, oh, hey, they've been loyal customers, but we're having a little bit of trouble right now because of their various accounts and all this kind of stuff. But we're going to call you back on Monday after the weekend because it was like Boxing weekend or whatever, lots of sales. And I was like, they're not going to call back. I'm going to have to be on top of this. Didn't they call back on Monday? And not only did they call back to pick up on the conversation, they had done additional research in terms of what could be working better for my parents. And I was like, oh wow, this is a good company. I've chosen right. We've chosen right with choosing Bell Canada, and I'm going to stay with them. It was just such a positive experience. And we've all had similar kinds of experiences with companies, right? You've had bad experiences, you go to a different place. It could be a pizza company, it could be, whatever kind of company. We all have those kinds of stories with companies. The piece that is interesting is those stories that we all have in choosing a place and wanting to stay or leave also have resonance with respect to student persistence in colleges and universities. So the same stories around, I've chosen the right company, I'm going to stay with this company. Students' self-stories around, I chose the right place, and it's important to graduate from here, are quantitatively and qualitatively connected to persistence. And so we're going to go into that because it's all around stories and the stories that we tell ourselves. And these are important stories we want students to tell themselves about their experiences with us. Enter Rent. So Rent is a story that is about love, and it's love across diversity. And there's all sorts of diversity in Rent in terms of genders, sexualities, and also working with stigmatized identities, working through, and also disease like AIDS. And my part was playing Tom Collins, and Tom Collins is, I love the Tom Collins part because I think Tom Collins also sings one of the most beautiful songs in musical theater history, which is the "I'll Cover You" reprise, which is the song of mourning at Angel's death. Angel, his partner, yeah. And their story, Angel and Tom Collins, are the central kind of like love piece of Rent. And Angel, we would have called a drag queen at the time, probably a transgender woman now, dies, and Tom sings this at the funeral. And part of a performer's role in any kind of performance is to tell the story, right? And so part of telling the story is ensuring that certain emotions are communicated. And in this plot line, empathy, care, love have to be communicated in order for folks to really get the story and Jonathan Larson's vision of love and inclusion. The part though was I struggled with communicating those emotions because pieces around empathy and care were not actually attributes they weren't muscles that I worked well, right? And they weren't muscles that I worked well, and just drawing attention to sort of structural inequities because of the value of toxic masculinity within a largely patriarchal society, right? And so attributes that are human, deeply human, like care, empathy, and love, are demonized. And they're not just demonized for the sake of demonization, they're demonized because they're feminine, right? And I subscribed to that demonization during my youth. Some of you might as well, whether you are male identifying, or female who have known that these are kinds of the rules of the game, and you've kind of imbibed yourself with that for survival. And so just invite folks for whom this resonates to just think about those larger grand narratives and how we kind of float in those waters and sometimes adapt to those waters in order to survive. But they're harmful, right, in terms of what they take us away from. And with respect to what they take us away from, it's tough because we are student affairs professionals and we're in the field. We're swimming with the students. So who we are and how we behave matters with respect to their experiences. So whether you think of the comic kind of with great power comes great with responsibility, or you're kind of the drag persona and RuPaul's with great power comes great responsibility, the key piece is we are part of the equation of the field and the interwovenness of experiences that students have in our campuses. And experience becomes a key consideration because with that model, the Braxton model, and those two stories of I chose the right place and it's important to graduate from here, experience becomes key in terms of that's what students need from us. They need that care, they need that empathy, that love. And again, I'll get into the empirical pieces soon. And the world also needs our students to have those attributes that we have demonized. And I'll get into that a little bit more because we need to talk about what is experience. And so the piece that's interesting, especially with COVID, and this is a book from Scott Galloway, Post-Corona, and Scott Galloway is a professor at New York University and has an amazing chapter on the post-secondary system in this book. And what he is projecting, and Scott Galloway's a business professor, so he studies a lot of the biggies like Microsoft and Google and stuff like that, right? And what he stated, and folks will probably resonate with this, is that the value proposition of higher education, what we previously coupled, is now decoupling, right? And so what we couple together with respect to the credential in whatever kind of discipline, with whatever kind of institutional reputation, plus the education or those specific capabilities or that specific learning, plus the experience is all decoupling, right? So students are looking for maybe just the credential, right? And not necessarily worried about learning the capabilities exactly, or the experiential pieces, or they're wanting the capabilities and not necessarily caring about the credential. And we see the online learning environments and pieces like this as well, right? And so all of that is decoupling. And experience in the traditional sense is with respect to those really immersive experiences like living in residence, athletics, those big community pieces. But experience transcends all of the other pieces, because even if we're just offering credentials, think micro-credentials, students have experiences through our systems, through our websites, through emails, through interactions. And so experience does still permeate all of the above that is decoupling. And so experience is an area to hone in on. But then what is experience? And so what I want to offer is that experience is simply storied. Experience is story. Experience is narrative composition. So for folks who know the story of Christmas or who celebrate Christmas, the commercialized story of Christmas is this enigma that is Santa, that engages in hyper surveillance and knows anything about everybody and has a list of good and bad, right? But as a kid, as those elements of those stories are amplified by the postal systems, by Coca-Cola commercials, by older siblings and parents saying, you know, you've been a bad person, a bad child, that comes as a threat to not to students, that's a whole other piece. That comes as a threat, as a warning to children. That changes their behavior. But then the whole, like, you're a good child, and the reward of being good also causes that excitement. And these are just stories, but they have an affective component that translates into reality and behavior. But it's just a story, right? But it punctuates how our existence is story. So if we're thinking of us like computers are programmed through different kinds of code, C++, etc. We're kind of like sociological computers, but unlike computers programmed through code, we are programmed through story. And this is a quote from Thomas King, an Indigenous writer in Canada, noting that the truth about stories is that's all we are. And so then it gets us to the whole piece around the stories that students tell themselves about their experiences within our environment, and the piece around how it's important to graduate from here, and I chose the right place. And the two levers that are empirically connected to those stories are called subsequent institutional commitments in the research, but the two levers are around demonstration of concern for welfare and commitment to integrity. And so those two levers are empirically connected to shaping students' stories, that they chose the right place and they feel that it's important to graduate from here. And empirically, there are different elements beneath both of these constructs, whether we're talking about colleges and universities. But generally speaking, in terms of concern for welfare, it's that things are easily navigable. It's that course options and course schedules are reflective of what students need. It's around accessibility of services. Like, they're very, very functional pieces. There's so much around the classroom in terms of faculty, professor care and relationality, not just for students, but also quality teaching that come into play. And also the nature of interactions from front desk folks, including advisors, reception, colleagues, and how students feel as a result of that. So that's the concern for welfare piece. The commitment to integrity is that generally we say what we do. So if we say we're student-centered, which everybody probably says they're student-centered, and students don't experience that, Like, let's say they get bounced from one area to another, or there's information that is wrong. That's all counter to what we're espousing and creating a dissonance in their experience, which is picked up in the quantitative research. And again, things that make sense, to us naturally, but just wanted to highlight that Braxton's research empirically demonstrates that they're connected to persistence vis-a-vis these stories around I chose the right place and it's important to graduate from here. So students need that from us, and the world needs students to also experience care and empathy and bring that into the world. And we have this quote here in that the Eurocentric based curricula are not the seeds that humanity needs. And this is no surprise because we see things in the world that are actually ripping humanity and our relationship with the world apart. And so we need to expand our toolkit, and we tend to, within the post-secondary sector, focus on things like Bloom's taxonomy, Fink's taxonomy, or constructing learning around 3 domains: the cognitive, or the knowing, the psychomotor, or the doing, and the affective, and the feeling. And what's missing is, with respect to the spiritual element, or that idea of connection, that we are all connected to each other and that we are connected with the world around us. That is something that we don't value, but it's something our indigenous folks, indigenous peoples, have been talking about, have been preaching to us about, and is deeply encoded in their ways of knowing and being with respect to medicine wheel teachings. So students need that, and the earth needs it as well in terms of deepening the spiritual component of things. This is from the World Economic Forum. You see impact of global risk, we see likelihood, and up in the top, so high likely, high impact, are things like climate and climate destruction and biodiversity loss, things that are inherently within our control if we were to experience greater connection. So that is it from me. There's more you'll see in the slide deck in terms of some research with respect to empathy. But with that, I will go into 5 minutes of any questions or needs from you around this stuff. Yes, Will.
Thanks, Neil. That was so wonderful. I'm thinking about all of these ideas that people probably, hopefully, generally agree with. But then when it's like rubber hits the road and it's about making sure the student's not getting bounced around 7 times, and that means strengthening connections and tightening up your, all those processes, how has that played out in your experience, in your role, or how you've seen it at your college in terms of navigating this, putting this into play for the student experience?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, Will. What I find is this kind of presentation and discussion does not land within the institutions and the executive teams that I'm part of. And there's a lot of folks who are very, and you need this, this isn't a critique, but I'm going to say very sort of business minded in terms of inputs, environment, measurable outputs. And that needs to happen with respect to the tumultuousness of post-secondary funding, right? And so what I typically do is translate all of this. And in Ontario, we have what is called with the province a strategic mandate agreement. And there are a lot of economic outcomes with respect to graduate employment, earnings, et cetera. And so what I do is I tie all of these components to money. Right, because it's in terms of persistence. I'll highlight our persistence rate and say if this increased X percentage, it would actually yield this year over year in terms of money, and this is where we need to invest. And so part of me always sees myself as straddling the PhD doctoral Neil world and the MBA that I don't have, that I pretend to have, in order to bring both of those worlds together. Does that make sense? Any other thoughts, needs? 'Tis okay. In which case, in the next like 2 minutes, what I'll just highlight here, empathy. Research on empathy shows that it can and should be taught. And what ends up growing within folks, and not just older folks, but some of these studies are with kids, is this whole idea of in-group and out-group. We all have in-group kind of identities, we all have out-group kind of identities. The teaching around difference can folks, kids even, incorporate out-group identities within their own and see that person who is different as connected. And the first season of the new version of Queer as Folk did that so beautifully in terms of dialogue across distance. So just wanted to highlight that research piece for you. Also wanted to highlight this research piece, and this is a social inquiry into some of the changes that happened in higher education as a result of the pandemic. And they looked at different individual consciousness changes and also societal level consciousness changes, and found that a lot of what folks in society are looking for is more connection, is more community, is more balance, is just more human. Like these pieces are changing. And has anyone heard of the teaching of the prophecy of the eighth fire? Okay, so it's one to look up and journey in as you see fit. I'm still journeying with it 4 years later after it was introduced to me. But it's an Anishinaabe teaching, and it's around how we as humans, as a humanity, are on the precipice of a fork in the road. And are we going to choose this fork in the road that is deepening neoliberal capitalism and our disconnection from each other, our competition with each other, and our treatment of world as commodity and valuing of markets? Or are we going to choose the path that we were meant to be on in terms of a humanity, in terms of care for each other and for the world? And a key piece for this in this teaching is that those of us born before the year 2000, so, I can't really tell right now. I won't even try. But those of us who were born the year 2000, we have the responsibility to equip those born after the year 2000 for their responsibilities to light the eighth fire and put us on that road towards greater connection with others and with the world. So that's an interesting part of this teaching and our own role in terms of care, empathy, love, and constructs that we don't always talk about as important within the higher ed context. Cool. So with that, I am done. Thank you for listening and engaging. And we have the amazing Glorifae coming up. Is that okay for you, Glorifae? That's what you'll see later. Oh, you do Glorifae. Thank you. And you can set up here if you want. It's okay? Okay. Oh. Oh. Of course you can use the clicker. I just took it away from you. There you go. Okay, you are with the mic.
So just forward.
Exactly.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Glorifae Samodio from De La Salle University. Okay. There. Sorry. What's the one before? All right. Okay. So my work is with the Culture and Arts Office, and we basically do management of our culture and arts programs for the university and the development of student artists. And the impetus of my study comes from the dilemma that arts administrators in the academe face these days, given some emerging cases of safe spaces violations involving our student artists and their artistic trainers. Okay, so what seems to be this reported increase in cases is noticed when educational institutions opened up in 2022 for in-person classes and trainings. This goes for the Philippines. At the time, there was also an increasing public awareness from the nationwide campaign on the Safe Spaces Act in the past 3 years. That was also the time when internal mechanisms regarding safe spaces is still being established. Thus, there was still this lack of communicated protocols from among offices in processing how to be the first responders for us being in student affairs. So, for such safe spaces violation cases. It's also expressed by all parties, the student, artist teachers, and the arts administrators, that these incidents are also taking a toll on their mental health while their case is being reviewed by the administrative offices involved. Almost always, the artist teachers take the brunt of being reprimanded or terminated. Sometimes they just resign due to emotional and mental stress, even if the case has not been fully closed. It has also been noticed that there's also an effect on the behavior and perspective of students, with some instances where they weaponize safe spaces, the safe spaces concept when they're displeased with their teacher. Oversensitivity to feedback and blowing incidents out of proportion. With this, the artistic trainers find it hard to also give an honest feedback in their performance for the student artists. And also for the fear of, losing their jobs, and worse, resort to toxic positivity. Okay. There. Okay, so given these concerns, this study aims to start discussions and provide actionable points on how academe-based offices handling culture and arts programs and student art organizations can ensure safe, creative spaces, and in the process prevent any further incidents of such violations through awareness campaigns and basic internal protocols for us, no? And specifically for handling concerns and endorsing to the university office assigned for this purpose. This study also intends to develop specialized safe spaces policies and guidelines in the management, communication, and training in academe-based cultural offices and provide an objective and balanced approach to processing such cases. Okay. And before I further dig deeper into the study, it's also important to get to know the key stakeholders, at least for our university. So the first of which is our office. I'm with the Culture and Arts Office, which manages the culture and arts programs of the university. We center on artistic development and arts education for both the general student body and the student artists. The office is also composed of several administrative staff, artist teachers, trainers, the student arts organizations, executive board, and their members. We have 3 dance groups, 3 music groups, a theater guild, an events management group, and an arts management group. The other key stakeholder is the Lasallian Center for Inclusion, Diversity, and Well-Being. So that's LCDWEL, which espouses active awareness in the university on gender responsiveness and safe space, mental health and well-being, and the accommodation of inclusion of diverse populations. Should there be any safe spaces violations in the community, this office processes these cases together with a team of case reviewers who will decide on it. They also provide counseling, the same office, counseling for the emotional support for both the aggrieved and the accused parties. And with that, okay, so just for some terms of reference before I proceed, we'll just take the simple definition of safe spaces. So I'm taking this from Oxford Dictionary as a place or environment in which a person or category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any emotional or physical harm. Now, okay, and so I think we would have to Okay, have to give a short brief on the Safe Spaces Act in the Philippines. No? So, as you notice in the title, they're basically center on gender-based sexual harassment. No? So, for specifically for training institutions, for public spaces, and all of those things. So for us, we in the university, okay, since we have our student artists, our arts programs, I think we have to also keep an open ground, no, for about the gray areas on the practice and the creative field. Now we need to understand the nuances of the practice and why artists are prone to encounter such safe spaces if not properly oriented at the onset. First, we have the physical contact during rehearsals and performances. It's very common, especially for the performing arts, depending on the art form and the material, such as theater and dance. It cannot also be avoided the topics, discussions, visual images, and language that may push the boundaries of what is treated as safe for public consumption. Art is in art in any form is associated also with the aim of disruption. Lastly, during the production preparation, it's also crucial that feedback, whether positive or negative, is also given to the young artists. And sometimes these feedback is also misconstrued, especially if that's as a negative feedback, as a personal attack. Okay, so and it's not a necessary input to improve on their craft, no. So thus these days the artistic trainers, according to them, feel like they are walking on eggshells. Okay, when they have to provide honest feedback to students, and thus they're very extra careful on how they're going to phrase and deliver their feedback such that it won't sound offensive. So I also have to frame this now that for us, this actually concept comes from our group, no? So we are trying to give a term to what we call in our spaces. So let's see if we can really say that we are really working on having safe creative spaces. And for them, these are points, no, that came from our discussions on the proper grounding of and understanding of spaces. For now, safe creative spaces allow for creatives to express themselves through skills and talents. It's also where the creatives learn from and collaborate comfortably with people who understand and value their impact, the impact of their art. The concept also of consent also surfaced, that every time there's a need for feedback giving or physically correcting in the performance or performing the scenes, there should be consent from the person who will receive the feedback or the correction. It's like likewise, there's also a call for brave spaces. So thank you, Doc Neil, that you also mentioned a while ago. Brave spaces, no, specifically in the practice, one that calls for dialogue, curiosity, accountability, and agency. Brave spaces allow the exploration and discussion of controversial issues, which is very relevant for us in the arts, through growing and learning together, with people being rewarded for their courage and for taking accountability for their words and actions. So I tried to draft this force field analysis by Lewin. So since I'm working on an action research, so and you can see here, the driving and restraining forces in resolving the main issue of having a general approach in processing safe spaces violation in the practice of creatives. So basically, our goal is to have a nuanced yet objective approach in resolving such safe spaces conflicts in the field. And with this, the driving forces I've enumerated there would be the supervisory support and advocacy of the institution and our low risk appetite. Of course, we don't want to have any student complaining anymore, or even trainers complaining. So it's also helpful that there's also good interpersonal relationships, very all of those openness from among our offices. So we try to from the areas of student affairs offices, we have a very good relationship, and we are so hopeful that this will be good driving forces for us to really have this particular guidelines and policies. And some restraining forces, of course, would be the workload, and also where our partner office is also kind of undermanned. So hopefully, no, we can also do something about the restraining forces as we go through this study, okay, for this cycle. For the methodology, so I'm using action research. So we start from contextualizing and defining the purpose of our research, and then constructing and planning resolutions and changes, and implementing plans and evaluating the results. So it should be noted that I'm still taking the taking action part okay, through our proposed interventions. Thus, we shall wait for another year to fully evaluate and see through the second cycle of the study. I've also used the first-person inquiry via observation, reaction, judgment, and intervention, and the underpredicted outcome and ladder of inference. For the second-person inquiry, I also used Torbert's full 4 parts of speech, and the third-person inquiry through Beckard's planned change process model. And so for our meta-learning, in terms of content, I'd like to share my these inputs. So first, the concerns on safe spaces violations. I find from the conversations we have, it seemed to have become rampant after the pandemic due to the increase in awareness in identifying violations. Okay, and then the manifestation of psychosocial side effects of the pandemic. And second, the response on this concern should be prioritized to prevent future cases from happening, considering the generally low-risk appetite of our institution. And third, that the resolution may be done through regular communication with the concerned parties. And fourth, action research helped to put forth the importance of developing structures and processes and guidelines for the welfare of our student artists and artist teachers. And finally, we've come up with an intervention to come up with a safe spaces policies and guidelines for artists and artist teachers. So these are basically what we plan to use. So these are our existing references for when we develop our policy guidelines. So we have Code of Ethics, the Safe Spaces Act, so of course out of the Philippine law. And then there's an adaptation of how we're going to implement it for the whole institution in the De La Salle University. And also the only safe spaces handbook for artists so far, but this is for professional artists that's produced by the Cultural Center of the Philippines. So these are basically what we have enumerated as part of what will be part of our policies. Okay, and then in terms of premise, so there's a preconceived notion, of course, that it will be a difficult exercise because I'm not really an expert in psychology or counseling. I'm a business graduate like you, sir. Okay, and there might be resistance to new proposals that would come from a non-practitioner. But I'm, of course, wrong because everyone's so open about it. The institution institution is also evolving and shows more openness to change in outlook, systems, and structures. And we also notice the need for vigilance in emerging dynamics from among the student organizations, and if our prevailing mechanisms or systems are still relevant for them, okay, in ensuring the safe space. And then lastly, responsibility for applying a humanistic approach in resolving internal conflicts and balancing the interests of the student artists and the all parties concerned. Okay. And lastly, the process. So this particular study aided in initializing having a structure, no, in coming up with a possible practical, proactive solution in preventing and handling cases of safe spaces violations. And there were also initial resolutions already, and everyone's all gung ho in preparing this particular document and campaign. So I think I'll have to end from there, just in time, no, for the bell. So I think we can have our discussion. Yeah.
That's okay. Oh, we are. Mic folks, you gotta love it when like sound folks are just like right in step with you. Thank you so much, Glorifay. Thoughts, questions, comments for Glorifay? It's okay. An important, really like insightful research area that I didn't I didn't appreciate until you were naming all of the pieces. So I'm very excited about the important work that you're going into because it is a gray area, right? So it's good that you're wrestling with it in the way that you are with both care for people, but also outcomes in terms of performance, particularly because of the importance of art, of pushing boundaries with a social message. So, Glorifay, thank you. And similar to what I did, do you want to take the last like 4 minutes for any other closing comments?
Are there no further questions? Yes. I don't know if it's.
It's okay. Okay. Do you want to take, and we'll come back to the questions as it percolates because we'll have time at the flip end. We just wanted to give a quick 5 minutes for folks if they had something just right at the top of their mind. But do you want to use any time for a closing statement?
Well, actually, what I'm doing right now is not just actually for our school. I'm part of, I head an association of cultural officers in the Philippines. And we really talk about these things because it also affects our mental health from the side of the arts managers because you are in the middle of things. So like and especially when you go through like safe spaces violations, those cases, you're in the middle and it's a he said she said thing. So it's really very difficult. And sometimes I had one instance where the student really just weaponized it. And eventually she admitted that she just did it because she doesn't like the trainer. So that's very unfair. And what we did was not to renew the person anymore. And I can't do anything about it anymore. So those things that, I'm being very, personal here. The personal, that I'm giving a personal sharing that these things really give confusion for us, the middle managers in universities, the cultural officers. And they're also sharing to me that they noticed a spike in such cases that, never existed before. So really, for us, and it's something that it's taboo for, well, at least for the Philippines. It's not something like we want to talk about every time there's a case. So and it's really about time for us, and at least from our university, to speak up, no, specifically for our industry. I also work in for a creative industries research, specifically in the performing arts. And these things, if not resolved, would really totally affect how we form our student artists and how we also care for the existing artists who would really want to teach their craft. So this is basically something that is really close to my heart in terms of this particular study. So I hope now we can also keep the conversation going. No, so when you also go back to your universities, and you have such practices like this. So I hope that I was able to share something with you, at least to jumpstart the conversation.
Cool. Glorifay, thank you so much. Yes, love for Glorifay. Thank you. And we have Stephanie coming up. And as the switches happen, Glorfy, just thank you as well, because whether it's he, she, they, there's a whole complexity of things, particularly when some of the gender narratives predispose us for thinking of who might be innocent and who might be guilty. So the terrain that you're working in is very, very, very rich, complex, and important. So thank you. And Stephanie, over to you.
Right. There we go. Okay, hello. So my name is Stephanie Bodecker, and I'm presenting today on educational cross-cultural kids at international schools here in South Korea. So I am currently working in Jeju Island, the tourist, they call it the Hawaii of Korea. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, if I'm honest, but it is beautiful. You can see palm trees, the ocean, mountains, you get it all. So I am working at an international school there, and I realize it's not quite higher ed, it's adjacent to, so I'm working with K through 12. I work personally with the 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, and we just saw our 12th graders graduate last weekend, so we're sending them out into the world. I do have a background in student affairs, but have a love affair with Korea and found myself here. So as you're visiting this country, I want to do a presentation that relates a little bit to the country you're in. And so a little bit more information about this area of schools in Jeju Island. It's called the Global Education City, and there's actually 4 international schools within this one neighborhood. And this was an initiative put forth by the Korean government in 2009. They wanted to retain more of their students in the country rather than sending them abroad in search of an English education. I'll get more into that later in the presentation, but I wanted to give a little bit of background to that area and where I'm coming from. So before I jump into the defined cohort of educational cross-culture kids, I wanted to step back and zoom out into third culture kids. So just by a show of raise of hands, who's familiar with the term? Okay, good, so a few. This was originally coined by Ruth Van Rutgen and Michael Pollack, and traditionally, like when this was first discovered, it was focused on kids that were the children of military spouses, missionaries, or diplomats. So it's children that grew up in a culture different than their home culture. Their passport culture, parent culture is another way that's referred to. And the 2 key characteristics was that these children had a genuine cross-cultural interaction. So they're not only living in another culture, but they're actually interacting. Maybe they're learning the language, going to school with students from that culture, really interacting and learning from that culture. And then also that they're in a situation with high mobility. So either they themselves are relocating every few years due to parents' work, or they're seeing their friends and their teachers and those around them relocating. So there's a lot of grief and loss of connection throughout their lives. And so Van Rutgen really dug into the psychological and social effects of living in such a lifestyle and how does that affect you as you grow up into adulthood. I wanted to include this one chart mostly because there's a lot of misinterpretations of this chart. And so you'll see what they call the third culture is in the middle, and it's not directly an overlap of the home culture and the second culture, but kind of how that individual internalizes and creates their own third culture. So it's very individualistic. Some of the fails diagrams are more like a traditional Venn diagram, and they call the overlapping area the third culture, which is incorrect because then it's the assumption that what is similar between the 2 cultures is what I'm taking, and that's not actually how this is created for the students. Giving a little bit more information, I'm just curious, would anyone here consider themselves a third culture adult? Like we now have a new term, you've either grown up this way or now live this way. Or maybe you have children that you're thinking, oh, maybe they're third culture kids. No? Okay. Just was curious if we had anyone in the room. One other characteristic that as these students start to self-identify is that they have very individualized experiences. Their experience is unique, but then when they meet other third culture kids, they bond over that shared experience. Although our countries, the places we live may be vastly different, we understand each other in that mobility and the division of cultures. So then narrowing in a little bit, as our world became more global, we have global nomads, we have people working abroad for work, we have educators moving abroad. There was a recognition that that third culture kid definition was too narrow. And so they expanded, and now we have what are called cross-cultural kids. And this includes, as you can see on the diagram, a myriad of different situations. It might be international adoptees, it might be children of immigrants or migrants, mixed or biracial children, and then down at the bottom, the group I'm going to focus on today is the educational cross-culture kids. So the situation is very similar for these students. It's that they may have lived in 2 or more cultural environments for a significant period of time and had meaningful involvement in those cultures. So educational cross-culture kids are those that attend international schools. And particularly, we're looking at students who attend an international school within their home country. So they're attending this international school, but still living in the country of their birth, their passport country. And so we've seen, and this is more focused on my experience in Korea and also some research I've done through a book called Growing Up in Transit by Tanao Tanu, and she does her work based in Indonesia. So there's been a kind of changing landscape of international schools. Historically, it was more just a school for those students I talked about before, maybe diplomats' children, military children. But now we're seeing more domestic kids attending these schools. And in Korea, a big part of this is the chase for an English education. I don't know how familiar you are with this trend in Korea, but they call it the English fever. Billions of dollars are spent every year on private tutoring, academy classes, extra tutoring. Just they study and study and study and study. And so it's a cash cow. It's how many Western individuals have jobs in this country teaching English. And so the chase for English education was traditionally through those private tutoring methods. And then at some point, individuals caught on and saw that they could have an entire English education at an international school. And so more domestic, mostly the wealthier classes, are chasing these educations at IB schools, AP schools, and other international schools. Another aspect of that is that it's a way to gain cultural capital and access to global opportunities. Many families want to send their children abroad to university, and to do so, they need that solid foundation in English education. So in Korea particularly, there are what are called foreign schools and then international schools. The foreign schools have quota requirements. So if you're a Korean national and want to attend a foreign school, you need to have either an international passport, a parent that has an international passport, or have lived abroad for at least 3 years. And they only accept up to 30% Korean students. The rest of the seats are reserved for international students. But on the other hand, international schools do not have that quota. So the area that I said I worked before, we are for international schools. And so we provide an international curriculum, but the student body is actually 80 to 90% domestic Korean students. And I found similar instance in Indonesia. Embassy schools are more like what the foreign schools are in South Korea. And then down here, what they have called SPK schools was brought in 2014. Indonesia passed a law that made many schools drop international from their name, and it was rather a school providing an overseas curriculum, but yet the students are primarily domestic students. So then moving on to the students, a little bit about my experience in the global education city. It's this odd bubble in Korea. You're here in Daegu. I actually used to live in Daegu. You can find culture. You do have foreign businesses, and you'll see international interaction. But the global education city is almost exclusively English. You go to Starbucks and they speak English. You go to the convenience store and they speak English. So it's this little bubble of English education, English interaction, and the expectations are all that everything's English. And so for the students, what does this mean? They're living within a subculture of their hometown. So for many students, they have this dual identity. When they go to school, they have an English name. They speak English. They have a different persona than when they go home at the end of the night and they go back into their Korean name, their Korean identity. They have honorifics speaking to their parents. With foreign teachers, they might be able to get by with calling them by their first name or being more casual. When they go home, it goes back to their Korean identity. And so they're often daily. Some students, we do have boarding, so it might not be daily interaction. It might be monthly or when they're on break, but they're code switching. They're, which identity am I today? Who am I in this situation? And then there's also a balance of cultures with that. Their school culture, their home culture, friend culture, which culture are they working with? And these educational cross-culture children deal with identity formation. So that progression, especially for those starting at the elementary level, their whole life has been one of dual identity and also representation. So are they becoming too American or are they not enough Korean? And it's this idea of where do you fit in the in-between? And some schools, this comes from the research again, they're navigating a cultural hierarchy. Like I mentioned before, this English fever, there's a perception that English ability or maybe a Western education puts you above the rest. And so they're always ranking themselves. Where am I in this hierarchy? How high am I? Where do I fit? And similar to the third culture kids noticed before, there is high mobility. A lot of times at international schools, students will leave, they may change schools, and also the teachers and faculty are often on a rotating basis. So these students also are navigating a loss of friendships and connection to place. And I included this chart here, and I really wanted to focus on the hidden immigrant and the adopted categories. These are different ways that third culture kids can be seen around the world. So the hidden immigrant is the one that when we see these Korean students attending the international school, but then go home to their neighborhoods, they look alike, they look like everyone else, but because of that education, they may begin to think different. And on the other end, adopted, that could be, we do have some international school kids at our school, most of which are children of the faculty and children of teachers. So they look different. You can spot them out easily in a classroom, but many have been in Korea so long that they think alike. They think like their peers, they've adapted some of that culture. So what does that do to their identity when someone's like, oh, you don't belong? Or I do belong. And I don't know how long you'll walk around in Korea, but if you go to a smaller town, there's a very good chance you could have a small child walk up and go, "외국인," and they will say, oh, you're a foreigner. Like, it's easy to just be spotted here. So all of this to say, what does it mean for us? Why does this matter to higher education? And today I really wanted to open this up as more of a talking point and a thought process than having all of the answers. But mostly it's the idea that we need to understand our student population and tailor our services appropriately. So are the students on our campus first generation international students, where it's the first time they've been abroad, they have a solid home country and self-identity? Or do they fall into one of these groups of third culture kids and cross-culture kids where they're dealing with navigating who they are and where they belong? Part of the way to do this is considering it in our inclusive language on campus. Do we want to change names of international office to a multicultural office? On forms and surveys, is there a way for students to identify as multicultural rather than choosing one? And then also, how do we even identify these students in the first place? How do we find the students with a lack of sense of belonging or struggle with identity? Just a few ideas, and there's many other ways, and I'd love to hear any suggestions. Again, offices and services, accessible language, or representation. If I'm working at a school and I identify as cross-cultural, letting the students know that, letting them know there's someone that may think like they do or have had similar experiences. Same again with other verbiages. And thinking about the beginning of the year, orientation seminars, creating a peer mentor program, the same way we think about services for our international students, just trying to be more inclusive to the variety of backgrounds where our students are coming from. And the last is supporting student organizations. There are a lot of online communities for third culture kids, but we're seeing less in-person interaction. But I think driving force from the students, they develop what they want, but as long as we're behind them to support those, could be a great way to get students on campus together. So to wrap up, this is just some suggested reading if you have any interest in this topic. The first one I referenced a few times, Growing Up in Transit. That was a research study done in Indonesia at an international school there. The second is one of like the meat and bones of third culture kids work by Ruth Van Recken and Michael Pollack. There's 3 different versions as they update it as more research has been done. And then the last 2 are more of like a how-to. Some is geared more towards like the parents of third culture kids, but also counselors and mental supporters for those students. So that is all.
Thank you, Stephanie. Everyone's so like, you've ingrained 15 minutes, like you just know. Thoughts, questions on Stephanie's work?
Just a comment and not a question. I think this is such a good topic, a very good food for thought. Because I think in university context, sometimes we develop programs and services for international students and domestic students. But now I know that there may be a group that is not left out, but not included as much as we want them to feel included as well. So just a good bit of information. Thank you for sharing.
That actually brought back a thought I had also is the thought of domestic students. Sometimes our domestic students are third culture kids coming home for the first time. So they want to explore their passport country, and university is a way to do that, but in fact they've never lived there. So in reality they could be international students, but we're putting them because of their passport in that domestic group. So it's kind of a hard sorting game.
Yeah, again, more of a comment, not a question. But I just, I so appreciate it. I went to an international school domestically myself, and it was interesting. I met up with some of my Korean friends who went abroad for high school and university and moved back to Korea after all of that. So they're kind of definitely in some of this. And then I myself kind of flipped from you. I started actually as a teacher at an international school in Indonesia and then moved into higher ed. And I just so appreciate these kinds of frameworks. And it's interesting. I do find at my university, at least, there's, if not explicitly named as such, there's some consideration of the diversity of what international or domestic might mean and that there's so many shades. But I found working at the international school I was at in Jakarta, these weren't conversations that were even like promoted or coming to the surface at all. I was also younger in my career, so I didn't feel like in a place to be bringing it up, but I just really appreciate you sharing some of your insights, and hopefully more conversations from this can emerge for both, primary, secondary, and higher education.
Thank you.
Any others for Stephanie? If not, may I? So, because I teach at University of Toronto in the higher ed program, and Finney's work is brought up in relation to this. And one of the pieces that the students always wrestle with is the power of neo-colonial approaches and the cultural capital lure of English as culture, and then therefore this slip into the adoption to, if you can't look alike, at least think alike, and how to hold that tension with the richness of culture that you have grown with, and not slide into that kind of assimilation vis-a-vis neocolonialism.
Yeah. I think this is all at an interesting time in that we're starting to see the switch in some of the Western schools of starting to more value those cultures and telling students, no, bring yourself to the table. And so it's a mental game of like, what does that student learned throughout their upbringing of, oh, I need to speak English, I need to be perfect, I need this, and then they go and it's like, well, but who are you? And maybe they're asking, I don't know, who am I? So I think it's really just being patient with students and giving that time and opportunity to explore themselves. And I think that's what university classically is for all students. So, yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
And with that, let's show our love appreciation to Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie. And up next is Mary Faye. And so, Stephanie, thanks for bringing up that tension with the dichotomy that is inherently between the labels of international versus domestic and highlighting the importance of the data and the questions that we ask and the data that we then bring forward as important to make sure that it is messily reflective of the authenticness of student intersectional diversity. So thank you for that important highlight. And with that, Mary Faye.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Annyeonghaseyo. I'm Mary Ferroz from the Philippines, and I'll be presenting our paper entitled An Exploratory Assessment of GED-C Issues Among Personals and Issue Inputs for a Situational Tool. So this is a research project grant that we were able to secure from our university, and these are my co-authors from that paper. Okay, next slide, please. So higher education is crucial for achieving. Yeah, okay, let's just wait for my PowerPoint presentation, okay? Thank you. All right. Okay, let's just wait for her to fix the PowerPoint. By the way, so again, so these are my co-authors from Philippine Normal University, from Mindanao State University, from Sarila State College, Pagadian City in Zamboanga. So we're represented from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. I'm all right. I trust her. Anyway, okay. Is it working? Okay. Okay, sige. Okay. Is it working already? It's locked. Slideshow. There you go. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, so as mentioned by our keynote speaker a while ago, higher education is crucial for achieving the sustainability development goals that focus on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. So GED-C are intricate facets essential for establishing a sustainable society. So it focuses primarily on goals number 4, on quality education, on 5, on gender equality, and SDG number 10 on reduce inequality. So as mentioned a while ago, there are 193 countries that are who committed for this SDG to be realized by the year 2030. So in achieving sustainability goals, however, Corcoran and Walls in 2004 rather, argued that there is no one way of developing sustainability in higher education. So in the context of Philippine education, there is a limited tool that assesses the different GED-C issues arising from the perspective of school personnel and students. And likewise, we also found out that there seemed to be scarcity of literature that offers a thorough discourse on GED-C due to the absence of measurement in higher education. So in order to challenge this skepticism, we thought of developing an instrument for GED-C that will measure and monitor the importance of SDG 4, 5, and 10, particularly on providing an equitable education and equal opportunity for boys and girls to reduce inequalities. And we further believe that there is also a necessity to conduct further action on gender equality, diversity, and social inclusion in all areas, especially on education. Although there is sustainability has been criticized for its complexity in assessment, we found ways to bridge this gap. So our study provides an exploratory assessment of Gen Z issues among personnel and students. And based on these identified issues, we develop a tool that will promote and assess this Gen Z among personnel and students in our university. So we have employed a mixed method, sequential, exploratory design to develop the tool and also the guidelines. So during the phase one, we conceptualized the pressing gender equality, diversity, and social inclusion issues among our personnel and student. And in phase two, we're able to develop the tool that will be used to measure the Gen Z. Okay. In phase one, we have conducted focus group discussion with our undergraduate and graduate students, leaders, faculty members, administrators, and staff from our 5 campuses, and that included 18 respondents. And the respondents were asked about their perceptions and knowledge about the Gen Z, and their responses were then encoded and transcribed. For phase two, we were able to conceptualize and identify those content quality related construct and then categorize them into 3 major constructs: the gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. And the tool that we were able to develop, we were able to survey a total of 374 students, 43 staff, 40 faculty members, and 8 administrators. So we have used 2 research instruments. For phase one, we have used a semi-structured interview questions. So these were questions that were crafted and validated, and the questions were designed to obtain the participants' knowledge, understanding, issues, practices, and recommendation for promotion of Gen Z. And in our phase two, we used the situationer tool. So this is a validated tool not to gather data for the quantitative part of our study. Okay, so these are the results and results and discussion. So we were able to conceptualize these 3 constructs. So we were able to define what gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. So for gender equality, it refers to a social construct in education that allows individuals of all genders in the educational community to be treated equally and experience equal opportunity. And for the concept of diversity, we were able to define it as educational practices that recognize, respect, and value differences among individuals in terms of their age, race, socioeconomic status, religion, gender, and disability. And last, our definition for social inclusion refers to policies that ensure participation and contribution in various educational aspects to reduce barriers and promote sense of belonging for all members of the educational community. So these were the common themes that emerged from the focus group discussion. So it's on representation in the planning process, the use of inclusive communication policies to address language barriers, awareness of policies, programs, and support resources on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion, and the contribution of technology to Gen Z and data-driven decision making. So based from these themes, we were able to formulate guidelines. So one on policy development and planning, so that the educational institution may adopt this contextualized definition of Gen Z and can be communicated to all stakeholders. In terms of awareness and training, no, the education institution must regularly conduct training programs, sessions, workshop to raise awareness on Gen Z. Also, a guideline on the use of inclusive language and communication. So the education institution must also enforce the use of inclusive language and communication that practice respect diverse experiences and identity. And again, the role of technology and cybersecurity. So the educational institution may utilize technology as tool to provide gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in all systems. So this is also our guideline in terms of diverse representation, that schools must strive to create opportunities, policies, practices that encourage participation by marginalized groups. And in terms of evaluation and monitoring, schools must regularly evaluate and monitor the progress towards Gen Z initiative. So make craft feedback regarding um, sorry, let me just go back to that slide. Okay. To create feedback in terms of what mechanisms and performance indicators that will measure the impact and areas for improvement. And then we have employed, in terms of our initial validation, we have used this framework in the conceptualization of our tool, in the planning of how to write the items, and during the validation of our instrument, we have used the EFA to evaluate the, um, the component structure of those items included in the survey tool. So the application of the PCA, or the principal component analysis, throughout the data cleaning process led to the significant decrease of the number of items. Initially, from 60 items, we were able to streamline the item into 21. So the 21 items now were systematically categorized into three separate factors. Factor one for gender equality, factor two for diversity, and the last factor is on inclusion. Okay, we have also used the Cronbach alpha to check how these factors component were consistent. And we also used the AVE, the average variance extracted, to check on the composite reliability. And we also used the partial least squares equation modeling for those items that were able to gather a small number of respondents. So when EFA and the Cronbach alpha were used to build the JEDC tool, we were able to establish its internal consistency and its validity. So this contributed to the development of a strong, dependable, and valid instrument for assessing JEDC related issues among our personnel and students. So for our recommendation, since this is just an initial exploration and a pilot study, we recommended to consistently improve and broaden the concept of JEDSIS tool by recognizing the importance of the educational environment. So it's important to include stakeholders in terms of their contribution in the development of this tool. Another recommendation is um, to have a thorough CFA analysis, because we've just conducted an EFA, so that we can assure that this tool can be used to a larger and more diverse group of respondents. And when we use CFA in the analysis of the instrument, it can also enhance the statistical robustness, the reliability of the instrument. So this is an additional step to achieve in terms of establishing the validation process of the tool. And also, we could also consider the cultural sensitivity and adaptation of this JEDSIT tool by including also the feedback that we're able to gather during the pilot study. Because since we were able to get small number of participants from other stakeholders like the administrators, the faculty, it's better if we could have the comments also coming from these various groups, so that we can incorporate their suggestion in the final tool. So the JEDSIT tool should incorporate also intersectionality, acknowledging the multifaceted aspect of diversity. So it is also advisable to regularly examine and update the tool to ensure that it is in line with changing society's expectations. So that's our recommendation for this study. So these are the references that we have used in the study. So that's about it for our paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Fay. Questions, comments, thoughts, shares for Mary Fay?
I know I'm speaking a lot, but I think I looked. I don't think.
Maybe.
Thanks for the work you're doing, Mary Faye. It was so interesting. I'm curious. So I work in like gender-based violence at my institution, and I know so often it's so hard to get. For me, it's so hard to get men in the door. So I was just curious about if there were like gender differences in the recruitment process and what maybe came out based on gender from those initial surveys. I don't know if you have some of that data at the top of your or at your fingertips or at the top of your mind, but just really curious if there were gender differences in the survey.
So that's a good question. For our study one, phase one of our study, we just selected student leaders regardless of their gender. And for the phase two of our study, what we did is just to ask everyone to answer the instrument. So we haven't yet included that aspect. Probably in our follow up project, we could also include that in the analysis of our paper. So that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Other thoughts, questions, needs for Mary Faye? Okay, and then because I know that there's a lot behind this, and it's such an intentional. And congrats on the sample size and the care that you got with the research design, and such clarity with the definitions, because those are also complex but need to be accessible for the purposes of research. So yes, so well done. So
Thank you.
Mary Faye, thank you so
Thank you,
so
Neil.
much. Yes, and let's give our love appreciation to Mary Faye. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to, the end of the session. But first, I know there's thank yous that will come later as well, but can we thank the tech folk and our runner extraordinaire support person? Thank you for what you've done, because this is for you. Thank you so much, because you made all of this so fluid, so easy. Thank you so much. The piece that we had talked about before, I will just put up, and that is the Oops, that's because I put the mic, now it's under my arm for the next presenter who will smell my cologne. I'm not wearing cologne, actually, it's just deodorant. And it's not just deodorant, that's important. But it's lavender smelling, if that's of interest to anybody. I was just buying time as I put this up. So this is the QR code. Oh, no, it's not. Can we put the QR code up the Word document? Sorry. You'll know how to do this. How do we project that? It's from Green Beaver's environmentally responsible company, if you ever want, and Canadian, if you are interested, and they ship. I don't know. It's an endorsement for Green Beaver. And if folks ever you feel like you're very sun sensitive, their sunscreens are phenomenal because they're actually blockers. And so if you're going to amazing places like Hawaii or the Korean Hawaii, to be responsible for not destroying the amazing ecosystems that we're allowed to enjoy. This is what happens when you just wait for QR codes. You just ask a question and keep going. Okay, but while that QR code gets posted, we'll do a little recap, and then the QR code is posted. So for folks, if you could please, with your devices, provide the feedback, however you want to engage with the formal part of the evaluation. I believe they are just 3 simple questions for how to go. And just as a reminder, we had Glorify. And Glorify brought up this amazing piece that she's working on that highlighted the weaponization of safe spaces, the difficulty that exists in terms of providing feedback to students, and a culture of toxic positivity, and these gray areas around safety in the creative field, and the need for a nuanced and objective approach in conflict resolution for safe space violations for creatives, an important area of action research within a very, very specific, nuanced population and context. So, Gloria Faye, thank you. Then we moved to Stephanie. And I love that you use the word interstitial, because the last time I heard the word interstitial, it was in a cell biology class talking about interstitial fluids, which I still don't know what it was, but I understood what interstitial meant here. And thank you for dissecting and problematizing the Venn diagram that we often see in terms of third culture kids and the importance of cross-cultural broadening and problematizing the lure of the cultural capital that is English in tension with the richness that is diverse culture and what people bring, and the importance of that as an environment for rich psychosocial development, right, in terms of those experiences within a cultural hierarchy and code switching. So very, very nicely done, Stephanie, thank you. And Mary Faye, you highlighted some amazing, important gender needs for inclusion. Some, again, like fantastic definitions that were really clear, and important takeaways in terms of policy development, planning, use of inclusive language, technology, and data-driven decision-making that not only work for and with folks with respect to gender inclusion, but also kind of zoom out in terms of institutional tools that can be woven in for the purposes of greater inclusion. And I think in your work in particular, particularly as I reflect on the 8th FIRE teaching and obligations for the next generation is playing with gender in such different ways that I think your work is so important in terms of what it's going to do in terms of creating that welcomeness for folks that are not working within the confines of what we might have emulated and reproduced. So thank you. And all of that, weaving back to my presentation, connect to that idea of care for welfare and commitment to integrity in terms of creating spaces that meet students' needs and also how students need to be for the world that we want to create. So that's a snapshot of our 1C session together. Are there any other questions or needs before we close? Is this okay? Okay, thank you. 감사합니다, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, thank you.